Hey there everyone, thanks for joining me in this video where we're going to give you an introduction to AWS IAM Identity Center, or Identity Center for short. As we progress through this video, I'll explain what Identity Center is, why we need and use it, and how to do some basic setup in your AWS account. So, what is Identity Center? Well, Identity Center is a service on AWS that used to be called AWS SSO, or Single Sign-On. It simplifies access management by giving us a centralized place to configure and control user access and permissions for multiple AWS accounts and applications. Now, Identity Center requires that you enable AWS organizations, but you can do that when you enable Identity Center. In my demo lab, I've already enabled organizations, so you won't see that step in the demo, but seriously, all you do is click Enable. Okay, with that said, here are a few points to know about Identity Center before we jump in. First, it has SAML 2.0 based identity provider support. So if you're using Microsoft Azure AD or Okta, for example, you can still make use of Identity Center in your AWS accounts. Also, Identity Center can use a built-in identity store, or it could integrate with an external directory like Active Directory. In this video, I'll demonstrate using the built-in identity store. Another thing Identity Center does is let you define fine-grained permission sets for access control. I'll show you a bit about how these are built when we get into the demo. Of course, as you do more programmatically, Identity Center works with the AWS CLI and SDK as well. And Identity Center also has the ability for us to perform attribute-based access control, or ABAC. But we're not going to get into that in this video. That's a little more advanced. So with that said, let's turn our attention to the AWS console and set up Identity Center together. All right, so here I am logged into my AWS console. I've already navigated to Identity Center, and I'm in the US West 2 region. That's Oregon. You can see that right here. That's US West 2. And this is a region that I'm able to enable Identity Center in. And the way we do that is we just hit this Enable button. And it doesn't take very long. It'll go ahead and enable Identity Center for us, and we're ready to go. Now, if you think about the pieces that you're going to need for Identity Center to work, you need that location of where you're getting the identity from. So if we come down here to, we can actually scroll down here, and it gives us like the list of things we should set up. But notice this one, confirm your identity source. If I go there, it took me over to settings. And if I go to identity source, I'm using that local directory, the one that's built into Identity Center. So that's good. I also want to keep an eye out for this access portal URL. We'll come back and get that later on once we have users. So what are the other things that we need? Well, we need groups, we need users, and we also need permission sets, because that tells us what users in that group are allowed to do. So let's go through and let's set those up. I'm going to go to users, and I'm going to add a user. And in this example, I'm going to add a user named Alice. So the way that I do that is I'll just enter Alice's name here, and then I'm going to have it generate a one-time password that I can share with this user when we're done. That way I have the password and I can log in. Okay. You can also send an email to the user with their setup instructions. That's totally fine as well. Okay, next thing I need to do is enter our user's email address. So I'm going to do that. And then I'll confirm that email address and enter the first and last name and the display name. And I just realized that I typoed the email address there. So let me just fix that. Okay, then I'm going to come down here and hit next. I don't have any groups yet. We're going to configure that on the actual groups page. If I were to click create group here, it'll open another tab. I can configure the group, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'll go to next, and then we review the information, and we click on add user. Here is that one-time password information. I'm just going to hit copy. And I've got a text file here that I'm just going to paste that into. Make sure I copied all of the sign-in instructions here. So I know, let's just make this a little smaller. There we go. So we got it all. We have all the login information, and I can go ahead and close this. Okay, so I have my user, Alice. Alice is going to be an admin. So let's go create a group for Alice. So I click on groups. I'm going to create a group, and I need to enter my group name. So let's go ahead and enter my admin group name, and I'll say this is the admin group. And then I'm going to click create group, and there's the group. I've got it. All right, that's pretty good, right? Okay, now what do we do next? We create a permission set. We're going to do each user. We're going to do a developer user next, but we're going to do each one of them one at a time. So now I'm going to go to permission sets. And what I want you to see here is that when I create a permission set, I have predefined permissions or I have custom permissions that are going to let me have a lot more flexibility. I can say you get EC2 full access or you get read-only access and all that stuff. But these predefined permission sets, you'll notice they have some for power users, read-only, security audit, things like that. I'm making Alice an administrator access user. So I'm going to leave it on that. I'm going to click on next. It already named it administrator access. I'm going to come down here. We can set our session duration. I'm going to leave that alone as well. Click on next, and then I'll create my permission set. So now I have these three pieces, right? I have a user, I have a group, and I have a permission set. And I need to marry those together to give them access with those permissions to certain AWS accounts, this account or other accounts that are part of my organization. So I'm going to go over here to AWS accounts now. And remember I said I had organizations already set up. And with organizations already set up, I've created other AWS accounts, made them part of the organization. And so the account I'm in right now is Security 101 Primary. This is my management account. And then I have a dev account and a production account. And so what I'm going to do for Alice, since Alice is the administrator, is I'm going to select all of these accounts that I want to have Alice administer. Okay? So then I'll assign users or groups, and I'm going to select that admin group. It's better to do the group rather than the user, because if I do the group, if I have other administrators, I just create the user, I put them in the group, and they already have the permissions applied. So it's going to be admins. I'll click on next. The permission set that's going to be applied to this is administrator access. I'll click on next. And then I review, submit, and boom. Alice should now have access to all of my three accounts here as an administrator. Okay, so how can we check that? Well, let's figure that out. Let's go to settings. Okay, remember down here under settings, we had this access portal URL. So we can copy that. And then I'm going to come over here to Firefox. And I'm just going to drop that in. And I should get an authentication page. Okay, so let's see what we get here. There we go. There's my sign-in page. Now if I come back over here to that text document, right, I already plugged in the access portal name. So the username is Alice. So let's plug Alice's name in here and click on next. And now it wants that password. This is this one-time password for Alice right here. So we'll copy that password and drop it in there. Click on sign in. Okay. Now I have MFA enabled, right? So multi-factor authentication. So what I need to do is I'm going to use my Authenticator app. I have 1Password already running in my browser. And so I'm going to edit this sign in for Alice. I'm going to put Alice here. And I'm going to save that. And let's just put that in my AWS Demos Vault. Okay. And then when I come back here, I'm going to find Alice, which is right here, Alice. And Let's click on next and show this QR code. Let's go back to Alice. And then I'm going to say, scan that QR code. It copied the one-time password. And I'm just going to drop that in here and assign MFA. All right, pretty cool. So I'm done with that. But now I have to actually set a password for Alice. So I'm going to use the suggested password from my password manager. And then I'm going to make sure that Alice is updated. So I'm going to update that, and I'm going to set the new password. Okay, so now I have my authentication credentials stored for Alice. And notice this. After your administrator gives you access to applications and AWS accounts, you can find them here. So what's going on? Well, let's go back over here. I created my user. I created my groups. I created my permission sets. And I should have assigned those AWS accounts, right? So let's just make sure. Let's go here. Let's go here. And let's go here. Let's go to groups. Go to admins. And notice that there's no users in my admins group. I need to put Alice in that admin group. We missed that step as we went through. Okay, that should be it. Let's come back over here and let's just refresh. Let's log out and log back in. And let's see if we have our access now. Okay. And there we go. All three accounts. That's exactly what we expected to see. So yes, I missed that step, but it's a good experience to see how we could troubleshoot that. So here's my dev account. If I click on administrator access, it signs me into that account. There we go. And I am Alice with administrator access. Perfect. This is exactly what I want to see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to sign Alice out. And then we're going to come back over here and let's go ahead and create developer Dan. Okay, so let's go to our groups. Let's create a new group. So because these three get connected together later, we can create them, the user, the group. Because these get connected together later, we can create the user, the group, and the permission set in any order we want and then put them together later. So I'm here with my group. I'm going to create my developer group. And I'll say that that's developer group. And I don't want to add Alice. We missed this step when we created the last group, but I don't want to add Alice here. I'll add Alice to the group later. So I'll click on next. Now I'm going to go to users. Click on add. Now I'm going to create developer Dan. So let's call him Dan. I'm going to click on add user. Let's create developer Dan and generate a one-time password that we can share later on. Let's go ahead and plug in Dan's email information. And Dan's first name, last name, and then we'll scroll down. We've got Dan the developer. We're going to click on next. Now we're going to put Dan in that developers group. This is what we should have done when we went through the first time with Alice. Made sure that Alice was connected to the admins group, but now we see where we can do that here. All right, so I click on next, come down and add my user Dan. Again, I want to copy the login information and let's drop it in there. Okay, and we'll close that. All right, now we're going to create a new permission set for Dan. And we're going to give Dan code catalyst, code commit, EC2. We'll give him some different permissions, right? So let's create a permission set. We're going to do a custom permission set this time. Click on next. And we're going to do AWS managed policies. And in here, let's do code catalyst. And I want to give him full access to Code Catalyst. Let's do code commit and give him code commit full access. And then let's do EC2 and give him EC2 full access. Okay, So now we've got those permissions for Dan developer, and we'll click on next. We're gonna give it a name, and we'll call that developers, and we'll click on next, come down, create. All right, so now we have our permission set, we have our user tied to our group, which is Dan. Now we're gonna go back to AWS accounts, and we're gonna go ahead and select only our production and dev accounts, because Dan, the developer, doesn't need access to our primary account. He's not gonna be doing billing, he's not gonna be setting up these permissions, nothing like that. He's just gonna be building apps, testing them in dev, and then deploying them in prod. Okay, so let's assign users or groups, and we're gonna select developers, click on next, and we're gonna attach that developers permission set, and submit. All right, now let's go back on over here and get our credentials. So there's Dan, that's our user. Let's copy Dan's one-time password. Let's plug Dan in here. Let's plug in that one-time password and hit sign in. Okay, so I'm just gonna hit edit here, and I'm gonna say this is Dan. And Dan is gonna be in AWS demos, and we'll hit save there. Okay, Authenticator app is what we're gonna use for MFA. We're gonna show that QR code. We're gonna find Dan here, and we're gonna tell it to scan the QR code, and we're gonna paste the one-time password in right there and assign MFA. Now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and use the suggested password. We're gonna find Dan down here and make sure Dan gets updated with that new password. Set the new password. And now we can sign in as Dan. And now you can see Dan only has access to those two accounts, doesn't have our primary, he has dev and prod. He can log in as a developer. He has the permissions that we assigned through that permission set. And just to check that, let's go to, let's say, code commit. Dan's got access there. Let's go to EC2. Dan's got access there, so we can see our instances that are running. And then let's go to VPCs, and let's see if Dan can see our VPCs. Okay, so he can see our VPCs. What can he do with our VPCs? Probably not much. He can't look at our rule groups, right? Let's go to WAF maybe, and Shield, which Dan does not have access to, and access denied. Okay, so it's doing exactly what we expected, and we're good to go. All right, so that is how we set up our Identity Center. The one last thing I want to show you here is as you're going through this and you're testing it, it's not permanent. So if I come back to the dashboard and I go all the way to, actually if I go down to settings, and if I come down here to management, I can actually delete the Identity Center instance that I'm running right now. Okay. All right, so I can hit delete. Let's go ahead and delete this instance of Identity Center now that we know that it works. That's not right. Let's do this again. I need that and that. Hit confirm. Oh, yes. I have to confirm that everything's going to be deleted. Confirm. And there we go. Identity Center has been deleted, and we're ready to clean things up. Okay, so what you've seen so far, I would consider the basic features of Identity Center, and this is a good start. But what about advanced features and best practices maybe? Well, advanced features would include what I mentioned earlier in this video, and that's attribute-based access control, or ABAC, for fine-grained permission-based control on user attributes, as well as AWS CLI integration for programmatic access, right? I've left a link down below to some resources to those topics. Now, as far as best practices go, here's the list. First, use AWS organizations for multi-account management. You should see now, based on that demo, how that's helpful, right? And it centralizes user management. We would want to implement least privilege access with granular permission sets, right? So we customized it for our developer and made it more granular. You'd want to do that. Only give them access to what they need. We would regularly audit user access and permissions. We would enable multi-factor authentication for all of our users. I had this on by default in the demo, and you saw that. If you're looking for a password manager, my favorite one is 1Password. You saw it in my demos. I've been using it for years, and it's top-notch. I'll put a link below in the notes as well. Also, utilize attribute-based access control if you want to scale your permissions management, right? I'll have to do another video on that, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you get updates when that comes out. You also want to implement automated user lifecycle management when you're using external IDPs, and we'll save that for another time. And of course, you'll want to monitor Identity Center activities, and you can do that with AWS CloudTrail. So hopefully after watching this video, you have a better understanding of Identity Center. By following the steps outlined in this video, you have everything you need to do the basic setup of Identity Center and start managing access like a pro, right? Yeah, that's what you want to do. Now, if you have any questions, use the comments below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that like button. I appreciate that. And if you want more tutorial style videos like this, please subscribe to the channel and you'll get updated when I create them. Now, it's your turn. Follow along with the demo and let me know how it goes in the comments below. Happy labbing!